Now, as we say goodbye to 2024, let's look at the year that was for South Africa's track record when it comes to social justice. The view that everyone deserves equal economic, political and social rights as well as opportunities is seemingly a far-fetched idea for many who live in one of the most unequal societies in the world. So let's unpack this a little bit more. Professor Thuli Madonsela joins us now. She's the director for the Center for Social Justice at Stellenbosch University, recently penning her thoughts as well in City Press. And it is really to that op-ed in the City Press that I will also just unravel this conversation a little bit more. Professor, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Indeed, festive greetings to you. 30 years ago, as I kick off this, what you write in the op-ed, leaders before us bestowed on us a constitution that was to serve as a blueprint for a new society. Has that new society failed?
Well, greetings, Arabile, and greetings to viewers. Thank you for the privilege. The society has not totally failed. There are some things that we've improved, but we do have the unenviable achievement of being the most unequal society in the world, despite a constitution that gives us a blueprint for achieving equality, not just any equality, but substantive equality. So yes, today is better than yesterday, but we need to change some things to stay on track regarding the society envisaged in the Constitution.
So how far would you say we are then from that blueprint, from attaining what was set out then 30 years ago at least?
Well, as I said in the City Press article, there are two things that we achieved. Through the Constitution, we achieved legal equality in that nobody can discriminate against anybody with the force of law. And it's much easier if it's direct discrimination. In other words, nobody can say, you're not going to get this benefit, you're not going to get this opportunity because you are Black, you're a woman, or you're a rural area, etc. We also have achieved political equality in that theoretically, everyone has a right to vote and everyone has a right to choose who becomes president, and anyone can become president. I'm saying theoretically because of the relationship between money and politics, is that whilst theoretically we all have a right to do these things, globally what is emerged as truth is that those with money are able to override those with numbers by using the money to speak for them.
Yeah, how do we get ourselves out of that situation? Because you're quite right. The biggest issue that we've now faced is that we're sitting with those that have and those that need to have, and numbers aren't being able to trump finances. When do we get an equal society? How do we foster that? Is that a government approach? Is that a social justice approach in that you and I and everybody around us need to have a social contract in that we do better and are better in that?
I agree with everything you've just said, Arabile. It's everyone's approach. And we do need a social contract. The president's call for a national dialogue might be an opportunity to do that. I think the starting point, Arabile, is to agree that there is a particular society that the Constitution enjoins us to establish. And that's a society that is founded on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. And we have to agree what is our understanding of social justice. John Rawls simplifies it to a society that is fair to all. And in my own writings, I talk about social justice being about embracing the humanity of every person through equal enjoyment of all rights and freedom. So it's not a society where the poor enjoy crumbs. It's a society where everyone enjoys all of these rights. As Bishop Tutu said, some can't just settle for crumbs from the master's table. The full menu of rights in the Constitution and the full menu of rights in society beyond fundamental rights in the Constitution should be practically accessible to everyone. So that's not possible when wealth inequality persists, when income inequality persists, spatial inequalities persist. So we need to be more intentional in addressing the imbalances that were created by colonialism and apartheid.
Yeah. These imbalances and it feels like maybe this year for the first time, weren't felt by lower income households alone. It feels like this weak economy, this strenuous financial strain on the country was also made note of by those in higher LSMs, for example, as well, and it's becoming a little bit more widespread. Where did we go wrong?
Well, firstly, we have failed to restructure South Africa from a diamond-shaped economy. So understand that South Africa was never meant to be a society; it was an economy meant for extraction for overseas colonizers, and it was also meant to support the white society. And so the Constitution envisages a society, an integrated society where it's not just a pyramid where blacks are part of the bottom of the pyramid scheme feeding the top. As I think Charles van Onslen writes in a book called The Seed is Mine, just how our society was structured to impoverish blacks and make them cheap labor, docile labor, and plenty labor. So we have to then restructure the economy. How do we do that? So the starting point is to agree that we're building the society envisaged in the Constitution. The second thing which we have failed to do in our democracy is to rebuild what was broken during colonialism and apartheid. And what was broken during colonialism and apartheid is self-sufficiency in historically Black rural areas and townships. So without building a bigger middle class, we are not going to be able to fix the problem. The bigger middle class means more Black people, not just a few BEE people. More Black people come into the middle class. And in that way, we don't end up with a society where everyone is at quarter to poverty, including the middle class.
Yeah, well, it feels dire. And that's the problem then, is that it makes it feel so dire. But this year was still another year in which we were able to exercise what feels very rare now, is beginning to feel a little bit difficult to do globally, and that is vote freely and democratically. We still have something to celebrate in that sense then, right?
In fact, we do have a lot to celebrate, and I'm sorry that I'm sounding like it's all doom and gloom. I do in the article talk about glimmers of hope, but you're right. One of the things is we really have exercised these political rights that are given to us by the Constitution with very limited constraints. For example, we're not constrained in terms of having a state that forces us to act in any particular way. So as we saw, the governing party lost quite extensively, but it was very quick to allow the IEC to declare the results and then democratically underwent the process of forming the GNU. So that leadership is part of the success story. The fact that the GNU has also agreed that the certain priorities that we all have to focus on is a glimmer of hope. But for me, I'm pinning my hope primarily, at least for this 1 year, which is 2025, on the G20 agreement, because in that agreement, it's addressing inequality. It's addressing hunger, which is becoming extreme, and also ensuring sustainability, among many other things. And that forces us into a conversation to start with, but it also focuses us on a very specific agenda.
What about the concern, though, Professor, that we seem to do a lot of talking? We've got a lot of these conferences, whether it be G20 that we're often invited to and a part of. We sometimes are invited to the G7 as well in those conversations. We have BRICS alignments coming through. We have investment summits that we head on to. We have the French government that invites emerging market nations as well to try and have many discussions around growth, etc. And it feels as though these discussions just keep happening, not much gets done. How do we finally roll up our sleeves and just do the work?
Well, I think some of it has been done. I do agree with you that conferences do not always translate into deliverables on all that has been agreed. But the beauty of conferences that we should never underestimate is talking. talking is important because it legitimizes certain narratives and delegitimizes others. So, for example, right now, the fight for substantive equality has been accepted as a global fight. The idea of prioritizing ending hunger has been accepted as a global fight. And lastly, the idea of economies and societies that are sustainable, not just in terms of environmental sustainability, important as it is, but sustainable in all dimensions, is something that has been accepted globally. So I do think there is some level of progress just by agreeing on what needs to be done. And then, of course, that's 50% of the job. The other 50% is the steps that will be taken. And I'm somehow hopeful. You know, I believe, and this is what I teach sometimes in leadership, either when I'm teaching at our university, at Stellenbosch University, under the Fund Sales Lambert Institute or the Tuma Foundation, because they do leadership studies. I do say failure is a great teacher if you're a good student. And I don't think that the whole world is ready for a turnaround strategy now, not just South Africa. I mean, the fact that if you just think in our own country, 0.1% of our people own 25% of the wealth, 0.1%.
Yeah.
And then 1% own about 50% of wealth. And the bottom owns negative assets. So certainly that's a recipe for instability. And I think our leaders are taking note of that. And we, the people, are also taking note of that.
Does the GNU then create greater accountability, shall we say, within government at the very least, and then for a broader society?
Absolutely. I think, again, for me, one of the best things that ever happened to us, I know other people see it differently, is the GNU, because disruption forces you to revisit everything. On the upper side of the GNU, people had always thought it's easy to govern. And on the other side of the GNU, people had always thought the pyramid society that was created by colonialism and apartheid needs to stay as it is. We just need to lift a few and have a few black spots at the top, but keep the pyramid as it is. But now that they're inside the boat, they do realize that it's far more complex and more is required of them. And the people on the other side, the governing party, has been forced to revisit the arrogance of incumbency. And I think the turnaround is marvelous. I speak about Telkom, about Eskom in the article. I mean, look at how Eskom has been beautifully turned around, which means when we are forced, when we have our back against the wall, when the competition is tough and the possibility of recall is real, we all pull up our socks.
Yeah, well, certainly feels that way. Prof, can I ask you, did South Africa reignite or perhaps stamp its place in the world in 2024, particularly when it comes to social justice matters, or did it just play a big part, considering the cases, of course, we had at the International Criminal Court as well?
Well, Arabile, I would say that's one of the aces in terms of South Africa's performance in 2024 was the courage to step out and call a spade when it comes to international law. I know it's been insulted and said it was paid by Iran or whoever, but I felt that South Africa became the society of Oliver Tambo, the society of Nelson Mandela, and the society of Helen Suzman by just saying law is law. Nobody should be above the law. Nobody should be below the law. And in Palestine, South Africa taking this matter to the ICJ was both courageous, but also a turning point in the rest of the world. Without South Africa's courage, the other countries like Ireland, etc., may not have immediately supported the stance against Israel's delinquency.
Very true. I have to ask what may be a theoretical question and maybe a philosophical one, so to speak, as well. But is globalization, is that coming to an end? Just consider the patriotism or the protectionism that's happening around the world right now.
Well, globalization does not depend on us. I mean, I once attended a conference in Sweden where we were reminded that the clouds don't need our permission to cross borders. And, countries are going to try and close their borders, but people will find a way in. So globalization is real, but also the financial systems are global.
Yeah.
The ownership of businesses is global. So globalization is real. But what is important, though, is to understand that globalization works for those with a global passport. And that's why the top has become richer because they're the ones with global passports. The bottom has become poorer because uncontrolled globalization impoverishes those at the bottom who do not have these global passports. And when I'm talking global passports, I don't mean a literal passport, I'm talking a virtual passport, the ability to trade anywhere, the ability to go anywhere through your education, through your money, and through your connections. Not everyone has that. And therefore, it's not the right answer to say, oh, let's just open borders, let's just allow everyone in. The only people who are going to benefit there are people who are going to get cheap, docile, and plenty labor. Those are not my words. They're words of Charles van Onselen, who writes the book, The Seed is Mine, and he talks about the whole story of the Mayene family from the eyes of Cas Mayene, looking at how these laws under colonialism and apartheid impoverished Black people and made them plenty, docile, cheap labor.
Hopes for 2025, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you that. I mean, it's our leading question here. Will South Africa's social justice landscape get better in 2025?
I personally think yes. Number one, it's been said that young people are not interested in democracy, and that's why they did not vote. No, they're very interested in democracy. They just do not always think that the available avenues of democracy are allowing them to make a difference. So we're seeing more young people in parliament, and we're seeing them also rendering a very strong voice. So I see 2025. I was speaking to one person, for example, in Parliament, one of the new people that went to Parliament, saying that one of the things they want to look at is the budget. Instead of just signing on the budget by Parliament, Parliament has to interrogate it and even refuse to approve the budget if the budget does not embrace more radical change to advance social justice. So that's just on the democracy front. Social accountability. You saw what happened with the Bila Act. So I would like to see more happening from civil society when government is dithering. I would like to see civil society saying, you have to obey the law. And one of the areas that I would like to see society acting is government must operationalize Chapter 5 of the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act. One of the main reasons we remain extremely unequal and even more unequal than we were in 1993 is because government created an act called the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act. And government did not implement the promotion of equality. It only implemented the prevention of future inequality. So the existing inequality has grown. Again, that's one area that is going to change. But more importantly, the dialogue that the president has invited us to be part of, if we use it meaningfully, if we also understand that the change will not have to come from government only, people on their own will have to give up land if they feel inspired to do so. People will have to open up spaces to create more equality. So I think those dialogues that are going to happen. And then lastly, the G20. So I do think that the social justice landscape in 2025 will be better.
Professor, it's an absolute pleasure to have had this conversation with you. Indeed, some important aspects to consider as well going into next year, but also just looking at where we've come from as well so far. Thank you so much for joining us as well here on News at Prime on Newzroom Afrika. Professor Thuli Madonsela, the Director of the Center for Social Justice and Law Trust, Chairperson at the Stellenbosch University, also former Public Protector of South Africa.